Hello everybody, welcome to Red Tool House. On today's video, since it's been raining all day, I thought I would do a summary of our pig processing for this year and share with you all the profit margin, the win, lose, that type of thing. So let's dive into it. Well, as I've done these videos in the past, I'll try to get into the numbers, make it detailed enough that it makes sense, but obviously try not to do what I normally do and drone on forever, so this becomes a super long video. We'll hopefully use some visuals that'll make it more exciting and maybe keep it moving. And if it starts raining harder and blowing in here onto the porch, then we'll wrap it up quicker. Kind of like the lightning bolt from last week's video. So if you followed the channel, as you know, we've reset our genetics. We bought all new pigs. So this year I had the cost of purchasing 14 pigs, and I got them from Six Oaks Farms, David Crafton down in South Carolina. I ordered 14, got 15. I got a bonus. He didn't mean to send me that one, but he sent it. It was an extra boar, so yeah, we'll talk about that here in a second. So that original upfront expense was $1,100, including transport, so that was to get 14 in a stowaway, up here to West Virginia from South Carolina, cost of the pigs and transport. So we were obviously in the hole there, $1,100. Out of those 15 pigs, we actually took 10 for processing. So there's 5 that stayed behind. We have 2 gilts and then the 3 boars. Out of those 10 pigs that we processed 8 of them as whole hogs and then 4 halves. So that adds up to our 10. Now, 2 of those are hogs that I processed to be packaged commercially for resale. So I'm absorbing all the processing costs for that. That pork will come back to my freezers and I will sell it from there. The rest, of course, were custom processing that went to the individual purchasers. So let's talk feed expense first. So throughout the course of raising these hogs, I purchased 10,800 pounds of pig feed. And that's broken out into, I start off with a 16% protein ration, and then as they get to a certain age, I switch to a 12% to finish them. The cost per 100 fluctuates. The 16% at its highest was $15 a hundred. The 12% at its lowest was $12.30 a hundred. So the total out of pocket in feed was $1,622.90. So the first thing I want to camp out on and do some math is looking at that feed conversion ratio to per pig. So of course you're doing the math there based on 15 hogs because I had to feed 15 of them, of course, even though I only sold or processed 10. So the cost of feeding those 15 through their life cycle, including the ones that are still standing on the farm right now, was $108.19 is what I spent per hog to feed them, which averages out to about 720 pounds per pig was fed. That's how much feed each pig was fed. So when I take the cost of buying the pigs and the cost of feeding the pigs, that makes the average cost per hog right at $182. So out of the 10 hogs that I processed, I had 1,570 pounds of hanging weight meat. So that's 72 to 76% of the standing weight. That's the hanging weight total. So that's all 10 hogs added up was 1,570 pounds. So the hanging weights came in a little bit less than what I'm used to, but we'll talk about that here in a second. My heaviest pig was 181 pounds hanging, and the lightest was 146 pounds hanging. So again, that was a total of 1,570 total in hanging weight. So in selling 6 wholes and 4 halves, again, 2 of those wholes are commercial, they're coming back to us. Selling those 6 wholes and 4 halves, we grossed $4,801. And that's based upon $3.50 a pound hanging weight on a whole hog as we sell, or $4.50 per pound hanging weight on a half hog that we sell. So as we divided those pigs up, of course, the different hanging weights, did the math, that's what we came up with, is $4,801 gross. So if you look at that and say, okay, that's the gross total there. If we subtract our feed costs of $1,622.90, we subtract our purchase price of $1,100, and I'm going to have a processing fee that I haven't gotten back yet because they're still working on the smoked meat. But the processing fee I'm estimating to be about $600 in those 2 whole hogs. I did some custom stuff, did some extra value added stuff to those pigs. So that's why it's going to be that high. That comes out to be a net of $1478.10, so about $1,400. So I know many of you are thinking, well, wow, Troy, that's a lot of work for 8 months for $1,400. And yes, it definitely is. There's more expense than I'm used to this year in raising hogs simply because of that purchase. So that $1,100 in the hole in buying the pigs. And also the fact 1/3 of the group of pigs that I purchased is still standing on the property and didn't get turned into dollars. I could have done that, but of course that's my breeding set. The 2 gilts that we have, of course, hopefully will be our genetic line. The boars, again, wasn't expecting 3. I kept the 3rd one because we're kind of testing to see which one we like. But one of those, at least one of those, will end up being processed here on farm this fall as the weather turns. We're going to do an old-fashioned hog killing and invite some friends over and do our own home butchering if I can get all my act together and get my smokehouse ready. So in looking at that $1,400 profit margin, the thing that I'm not taking into consideration are those 2 hogs that are packaged for commercial resale. So I'm anticipating that cost, that $600 cost of the processing. But now I'm going to be able to turn around and sell those. So over the next 4 or 5 months, usually is when we sell out, then I have all of these cuts that I can sell at a much higher price. Our bacon we sell for $8.50 a pound, all the way down to our cheapest, which is ground pork, at $5.50 a pound. So I can recoup some of that $600 processing. In fact, I hope I not only recoup it, but I pay off that $600 processing and then start adding back to profit at that point. So that's one variable that isn't included in these numbers, that $1,400 actually not be the true profit. It's going to be higher than that if we have successful sales, unless something crazy happens like a freezer blows up or something. So those hanging weights, why were those hanging weights a little bit less than what I was expecting? Well, unfortunately, there's multiple reasons why my hanging weights were less. And if I was a good scientist, or even a good farmer for that matter, I wouldn't have changed so many things all in one year. I would have tried one thing, compared it, then tried another thing the following year. But I didn't. I guess I'm a tad bit impatient. So 2 major changes we had, of course, were our genetics. Again, buying these pigs from David Crafton, knowing that with large black and some of the Carolina spot hogs, some of the other genetics he has in these pigs, that they're going to grow a little bit slower than my Duroc Hampshire mix, which is more of a production run. The trade-off I wanted was obviously better quality pork, more marbling. David sent me samples, really liked what I got from those. So hoping to see that manifest in what we get back here in the next week or so. And better pasturability. My Duroc hogs are really, really tough on the pasture, especially our hillside pasture. They get really rooted up quickly. So these hogs seem to be a little bit lighter. They graze a little bit better than my Duroc Hampshire mix. The second thing I changed was my feed process. Again, if you followed the channel in the past, you've seen I use, when it's time to have production hogs, I use my big 2-ton feeder, fill that turkey up, and kind of set and forget. And we're using that dry, very powdery feed. It almost looks like a flour or a cornmeal. And those pigs have unlimited access to that feed. And when that feeder would run empty about every 2 weeks, I just keep dumping feed into it. So I was really pumping the feed to the pigs. They had free choice. Had a lot of waste, I think. And of course, since it was that dry, powdery feed, I saw it a lot in the manure. I saw it pass through them well. Digestibility was a concern. So in my research and transition this year, I thought, well, instead of having unlimited feed that I don't have to touch about once every 2 weeks, let's go with a soaked, fermented feed that is a daily ration. So I have full control over the amount of feed they get. I do have a daily contact point with them. And hopefully the feed is more digestible, and the fermentation process actually promotes good gut health to make it a healthier pig. So changing those 2 things really kind of changed my ability to measure what was the deciding factor. But here's the smoking gun that I've discovered. So even if these pigs turned out to be lighter, but it's a better quality meat, then okay, I'll take that to some degree. Keep in mind what I said this year was my average consumption of feed per hog was 720 pounds. And for those of you keeping track of your own, that's a number I really like to come back to really kind of determine the rate in which I'm feeding out. When I go back and look at previous years, when I had my largest group back in 2016, I was averaging 1,245 pounds of feed per pig for a 7-month window. So I went 8 months with these hogs. Back in 2016 was the day here. I went 7 months and fed out 1,245 pounds. So that's a big difference. That's a huge difference, actually. Even when I went back and looked at a small group that I had in 2018, my average feed per hog was around 1,100 pounds. So I fed out a lot less feed this time. And really it was kind of a gauging system. I was looking, the way I was measuring it was I was measuring on the front end my dry feed I was putting in to soak and to ferment. So I was measuring that, and I was trying to stay at that ration. When they were small piglets, we were 2.5 to 3 pounds a day, and we maxed out at 5.3 pounds a day. From my experience, that 5 pounds a day is kind of where you wanted to hang out. That was the sweet spot. So when I look at that and say, wow, okay, if I would have fed out, the difference there, 500 plus pounds per pig, if I would have fed out more of that feed throughout the course of that time, I probably could have had heavier pigs, better hanging weights. Certainly could have. But I also have to take consideration there was a lot of waste when I was using that drop feeder. When I was putting out that 1,100 and 1,200 pounds of feed per pig, that was using that drop feeder, that dry feed, that there would be a lot of waste, and of course a lot of it passing through the pig. So just in a quick forecast, next year I'm not necessarily going to use my drop feeder, but I'm not necessarily going to do the exact same thing I did this year. We'll talk about that when we get a plan together of how we're going to feed the next group of pigs. But it's a neat starting point. It's a metric, and that's why I recommend you guys keep your notes, keep copious notes. This is actually a printout from Google Sheets where I keep everything in a spreadsheet and can calculate and document it there. And another note, when I look at the average cost per hog, so the cost of money going into that hog, the feed and the cost of purchasing this year, like I said, it was $182. When I look back at my 2016 run, where it was a much larger group of hogs, I had 22 hogs there, then my average cost per hog was $153. So the expense of buying the hog shows up there, but my cost, my average per pig isn't far off. So when I compare those two, the 182 to the 153, the cost of purchasing the hogs is really what's pushing that up. If I would drop out that $1,100 of purchase cost, then my average cost per hog drops all the way down to $105. So that 105 versus 153, that's a pretty big swing. So of course the purchase of the hogs offset that, but when I look at that profit margin or that conversion of less feed and this different breed of hog, next year is really going to set the tone as to whether this breed switch was a good idea for our operation. So just as a comparison, so with those 22 hogs back in 2016, the average hanging weight of those hogs was 277 pounds, which is a very large hog. In fact, I lost some customers over that because they just weren't expecting to spend that much money. Of course, they bought the pig, they promised to do so, so they bought the pig. Some of them didn't come back the following year because it was just too expensive for them. And I get it. When you end up paying the processing fee in this hog, you're up to $1,500 for a hog. You're getting up into beef prices at that point. Just our last group in 2018, our average hanging weight was 248. So compare that with our average hanging weight this year of 157 pounds. That's a dramatic difference. So that's a difference of, my goodness, 120 pounds in 2016 and almost 90 pounds just in compared to 2018. 2019 we didn't have any production because that was our year of death. So I'd like to see a little bit higher hanging weight, but in full disclosure, in all fairness, those 277 pound hanging weight and 248 pound hanging weight is a little too much. Not only for the customer to absorb that cost, but even if you talk to anybody that's been a hog producer for a very, very long time, you know that there's that plateau of growth that happens where the pig ceases putting on meat poundage more so than just putting on fat poundage. And that was pretty evident when we'd process our hogs in 18 and 17 and 16 when we had these big hanging weights, that we'd see a ton, because I'd always asked to keep the lard and the back fat, and we'd see a ton of that come back. So the typical customer, when you take their hanging weight and say, well, 10% of that is, or 5% of that is all back fat, again, it kind of leaves a bad taste in their mouth, pardon the pun. That's because a lot of people don't use that lard for anything. They see that as just waste, so that's money burned. So this year, I definitely had a lot more satisfied customers. They were excited with the fact that it was cheaper for them to buy a whole or half hog. Granted, they've got less meat. They had less weight brought to them. But so far, we've had nothing but good feedback. Well, obviously, I could spend hours and hours talking more about this. I want to try to keep it brief. If you have any questions specifically, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get to them. Or if you want to guarantee that I can see it, because sometimes I don't always see the comments, and go to redtoolhouse.com, use our contact form, and I see and answer every single one of those inquiries that come through the website there. So drop me a line if you want to talk more about these numbers. Well, I hope this helps. I hope it was informative, and when it stops raining, we'll get back out and keep rolling. All right, take care, everybody.